Next, we'll take a look at two examples of ethnic religions. In terms of number of adherents, Hinduism is by far the largest of the ethnic religions and in fact ranks third after Christianity and Islam as a world religion. Hinduism is one of the oldest religions in the modern world, dating back over 4,000 years, originating in the Indus River Valley of what is today part of Pakistan. Hinduism is also quite unique among world religions in a number of ways. The religion does not have a single founder, a single theology, or any agreement on its origins. The common account of the history of Hinduism holds that the religion is based on the ancient practices in the Indus River cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. The ancient practices included ritual bathing and belief in reincarnation, or at least a long journey after death, as well as animal sacrifices and sculptures that may depict Hindu gods as found through archaeological evidence of such rituals. The common history says that Aryans invaded, although some say migrated, into the Indus region, bringing with them the Indo-European languages as well as their religion. The Aryans first settled in the area now called the Punjab in northwestern India and later migrated east to the Ganges River Valley as far as Bengal. Centuries of intermingling with the Dravidians who were already living in the area modified their religious beliefs. Still, despite the ambiguous beginnings of Hinduism, one thing is certain: Hinduism is no longer associated with its hearth in Pakistan. Pakistan is primarily a Muslim country, and Hinduism is found today mainly in India. In fact, one of the most sacred places for Hindus is the Ganges River in India. Most of the adherents of the world's leading ethnic religions have remained embedded in the culture where they originated, unlike universalizing religions, which typically diffuse from one culture to another. Adherents of an ethnic religion, such as Hinduism, are typically a people with a shared history, language, and destiny. Rituals are performed to pray for favorable agricultural conditions or to give thanks for past success. So it's not surprising that with around 1 billion adherents, Hinduism has remained essentially a cultural religion of South Asia. Even during the colonial period, when hundreds of thousands of Indians were transported to other areas of the world, including East and South Africa, the Caribbean, and North and South America, this relocation diffusion did not result in new Hindu regions, and only few non-Indians were converted to the faith. Hinduism is decidedly polytheistic religion. Although Hindus recognize one supreme god, Brahman, it is his many manifestations that are worshipped directly. The most popular Hindu gods are as follows: Vishnu, whereby 80% of adherents worship to this particular god, a loving god incarnated as Krishna. The second largest is dedicated to Shiva, a god who can be both protective and destructive. The goddess Shakti is a creative source of energy. Furthermore, the earliest surviving Hindu texts, known as Vedas, were written around 1100 before Common Era. Some rituals from this era survive in contemporary Hinduism, including worship of various gods representing earth, atmosphere, and sky. By around 2000 years ago, key texts were composed and rituals were developed that remain central to contemporary Hinduism. The earliest surviving Hindu temples were constructed between 1500 and 2000 years ago. One of the principal reasons that ethnic religions are highly clustered is that they are closely tied to the physical geography of a particular place. Hinduism is closely tied to the geography of India, such that riverbanks and coastlines are among the holiest shrines, and pilgrimages may be undertaken to view these physical features. Hindus consider a pilgrimage, known as a tirtha, to be an act of purification. Although not a substitute for meditation, the pilgrimage is an important act in achieving redemption. Particularly sacred places attract Hindus from all over the world. Despite the relatively remote locations of some, less important shrines attract primarily local pilgrims. Because Hinduism has no central authority, the relative importance of these shrines is established by tradition, not so much by doctrine. For example, some Indians come from all over the country to bathe in the Ganges. Some Hindus make long-distance pilgrimages to Mount Kailash, located at the source of the Ganges in the Himalayas, which is holy because Shiva lives there. And others will make long-distance pilgrimages to the Indian city of Varanasi, which is on the holy Ganges River as well. Local residents may consider a nearby town to be holy if Shiva is thought to have visited it at one time. Hinduism does not have an administrative or bureaucratic structure like Christianity and Islam. Hinduism is a conglomeration of beliefs characterized by a great diversity of institutional forms and practices. The fundamental doctrine is karma, which has to do with the transferability of the soul. According to Hindu doctrine, all beings having souls are arranged in a hierarchy. The ideal is to move upward in the hierarchy and then escape from the eternal cycle of reincarnation through union with Brahman, who is again the universal soul. A soul moves upward or downward according to the individual's behavior in the present life. So, one must perform good deeds and adherence to the faith, which would ultimately lead to a higher level in the next life, whereas bad behavior would lead to demotion to a lower level. So there are various rules that you must follow called dharmas, and these various rules and deeds that you have to carry out in your lifetime then determines what your karma will be. And your karma will then determine how and at what level you are reborn. So this is a very hierarchical and organized system. All souls, those of animals as well as humans, participate in this process. The principle of reincarnation is a cornerstone of Hinduism. If you mistreat an animal in this life, you may be that animal in a future life. Hinduism's doctrines are also closely bound to India's society's caste system. For castes themselves are steps on the universal ladder. This is a social economic system that establishes, if you will, a rigid segregation of people according to ancestry and occupation. The caste system, however, locks people into particular social classes and imposes many restrictions, especially in the lowest of the castes, the untouchables. The caste system apparently originated around 1500 before Common Era, when Aryans invaded India from the west. The Aryans divided themselves into 4 castes that developed strong differences in social and economic position. The Brahmins, who were the priests and top administrators, were at the top of the caste system, and below them you had the warriors, and then below them merchants, and then at the bottom you had the agricultural workers and artisans. Below the 4 castes were the Dalits, who are also known as outcasts or untouchables because they did work that was considered too dirty for other castes. For example, they did work with animal skins, so they were leather workers, or you had people who handled dead things, such as morticians, or if you sold alcohol, or you were a fisher folk. These were considered activities that were unclean. The Dalits are descended from the indigenous people who lived in India prior to the Aryan conquest, and they comprise around 16% of India's total population. Over the centuries, the original castes split into thousands of subcastes, and until recently, social relations among the castes were limited, and the rights of the non-Brahmins, especially Dalits, were restricted. British administrators and Christian missionaries pointed out the shortcomings of the caste system, such as neglect of the untouchables' health and economic problems. In fact, until a generation ago, the untouchables could not enter temples, they were excluded from certain schools, and were restricted to performing the most unpleasant tasks. Things began to change a little bit with the coming of other religions to India, such as Christianity and Islam, and the effects of modernization during the colonial period, and especially the work of Mahatma Gandhi, who ultimately loosened the social barriers of the caste system and somewhat improved the many lives of the 200 million untouchables. Although discrimination by the caste is illegal in India and the rigid caste system has been considerably relaxed in recent years, social inequality still persists. A government planned to devise a quota system designed to give untouchables more places in the country's universities generated strong opposition, for example. And people looking for a marriage partner advertise their caste and the castes they are willing to consider for a spouse. Judaism is a 4,000-year-old religion and the first major monotheistic faith, which grew out of the belief system of the Jews, one of the several nomadic Semitic tribes living in southwestern Asia about 4,000 years ago. It is the parent religion of Christianity and is closely related to Islam. The traditional roots of Judaism lie in the teachings of Abraham, who is credited with uniting his people to worship only one God. And according to Jewish teaching, Abraham and God have a covenant in which the Jews agree to worship only one God, and God agrees to protect his chosen people, the Jews. As with Islam and Christianity, people are rewarded for their faith, are punished for violating God's commandments, and can atone for their sins. The Jewish Holy Book, or Torah, comprises the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. In contrast to other monotheistic faiths, Judaism is not proselytic and has remained an ethnic religion through most of its existence. The history of the Jews is filled with upheaval. Moses led them from Egypt, where they had been enslaved, to Canaan, where an internal conflict developed and the nation split into 2 branches, Israel and Judah. Israel was subsequently wiped out by enemies, but Judah survived longer, only to be conquered by the Babylonians and the Assyrians. The Jews regrouped to rebuild their headquarters, Jerusalem, but then fell victim to a series of foreign powers. The Romans destroyed their holy city in 70 Common Era and drove the Jews away, scattering the adherents to the faith far and wide. Jews retained only a small presence on the eastern shores of the Mediterranean until the late 19th century. The scattering of Jews during the Roman destruction of Jerusalem is known as diaspora, a term that now signifies the spatial dispersion of members of any ethnic group. The Jews who went north into Central Europe came to be known as Ashkenazim, and the Jews who scattered across North Africa and into Spain and Portugal are called Sephardim. For centuries, both the Ashkenazim and Sephardim were persecuted, denied citizenship, driven into ghettos, and massacred. In fact, other nationalities often persecuted the Jews living in their midst. Historically, the Jews of many European countries were forced to live permanently in ghettos, defined as city neighborhoods that were set up by law to be inhabited only by Jews. The term ghetto originated during the 16th century in Venice, Italy, as a reference to the city's former copper foundry or metal casting district. In the face of constant threats to their existence, the Jews were sustained by extraordinary efforts to maintain a sense of community and faith. The idea of a homeland for the Jewish people, which became popular during the 19th century, developed into the ideology of Zionism. Zionists' ideals are rooted in the belief that Jews should not be absorbed into other societies. So this led to the increased Jewish migration to the land of Israel, then under Ottoman rule, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The horrors of the Nazi campaign against Jews from 1939 to 1945, when the Nazis established concentration camps and killed some 6 million Jews, persuaded many Jews to adopt Zionism. Jews from all over the world concluded that their only hope of survival was to establish a strongly defended homeland on the shores of the Eastern Mediterranean. Aided by sympathetic members of the international community, the Zionist goal of a Jewish state became reality in 1948, when 2 states, Israel and Palestine, were carved out of the territory of the Eastern Mediterranean in a United Nations resolution. Today, less than 10% of the world's 15 million Jews live in Europe, compared to 90% a century ago. Still, the distribution of Jews demonstrates Judaism's worldwide presence. Roughly 2/5 of the world's 15 million Jews live in the United States, and another 2/5 in Israel. Religions adopt different types of annual calendars. The solar calendar has months that correspond to the season or the apparent position of the sun in relation to the stars. The solar calendar, such as followed by Christians, has 12 months, each containing 30 or 31 days, taking up the astronomical slack with 28 or 29 days in February. The lunar calendar has months that correspond to cycles of moon phases. Islam uses a lunar calendar, which has around 354 days. A lunisolar calendar has lunar months that are brought into alignment with the solar year through periodic adjustment. The Jewish calendar is lunisolar, with most years comprising around 354 days, but adding a 13th month every 2 or 3 years to line up with agricultural and solar calendars. Regardless of the type that is used, the annual calendar of a religion typically includes holidays with theological themes. The principal purpose of the holidays in universalizing religions is to commemorate events in the founder's life rather than to the physical environment. Because Islam uses a lunar calendar, its holidays arrive in different seasons from generation to generation. For example, Ramadan, during which Muslims fast from sunup to sundown, occurred in the Northern Hemisphere in the summer of 2010 and the spring of 2020, and will occur in the winter of 2030. So fasting during the daylight hours of the fall season would require a much shorter period of time, since days are much shorter in the fall. And then in June, since you have longer days, you would have a much longer period of fasting. Christians in the Northern Hemisphere associate the birth of Jesus on December 25th with snow and cold, whereas Christians in the Southern Hemisphere observe December 25th with warm days and abundant sunlight. Major holidays in Judaism are based on events in the Hebrew Bible and connected to the agricultural calendar of the religion's homeland in present-day Israel. These holidays are known as pilgrimage festivals because the Torah called for the Israelites to come to the temple in Jerusalem. Unlike in Islam, in Judaism, the calendar is adjusted so that the religious holidays tend to occur about the same time every year. So in the fall season of the year, we have 3 significant Jewish holidays that are religiously related. Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year. Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day of the year in Judaism, is the Day of Atonement. Jews traditionally observe this holy day with a day-long fast, confession, and intensive prayer, often spending most of the day in synagogue services. And then there is Sukkot, which is the agricultural festival that originally was considered a thanksgiving for the fruit harvest. Sukkot recalls the period of 40 years when the Israelites were in the desert and relied on God for food and shelter. The term derives from the Hebrew word for booths, or temporary shelters, which the Israelites used in the desert. Sukkot also celebrates the final harvest of the year. A prayer for rain is offered to bring success in the upcoming agricultural year. So there's a strong religious and agricultural connection to these events that are associated with Judaism. And then in the spring season, there's another major event that is part of the Jewish ritual called Passover. Passover, or Pesach, celebrates the liberation of the Jews from slavery in Egypt and the time for harvesting barley in the land of Israel. The Pharaoh, who was a king of ancient Egypt, a tyrant, had decreed that all Jewish male babies were to be killed because he felt that the Jewish people were becoming too strong. The name Passover comes from when the angel of death passed over the homes of the Jews And because they had been forewarned, they put lamb's blood on their doors so that death would spare their firstborn child. Lastly, we'll focus on reasons for territorial conflicts among certain religions. Religion very often lies at the root of conflict between cultural groups. People seem less willing to tolerate and to accommodate differences in religious matters than in any other aspect of culture. Catholics versus Protestants in Northern Ireland, Hindus versus Muslims in India, Catholics versus Orthodox versus Muslims in the Balkans, and Jews versus Muslims in the Middle East, represent conflicts based largely in religion. In short, religion is a central defining trait of many cultural groups, a distinction between us and them, and a highly territorial phenomenon with strong, often ancient linkages to the spirit of place, ethnicity, and nationality, as you saw with the examples that I provided for you. Religious conflict in Southwest Asia is among the world's longest standing and most difficult to control. But to understand the territorial conflict that exists in this part of the world, we need to understand the geographic elements underlying the conflicts surrounding this small strip of land, most of which is now part of the state of Israel. Jews make a special claim to the territory they call the Promised Land. The major events in the development of Judaism took place there, and the region's customs and rituals acquired meaning from the agricultural life of the ancient Israelite tribes. Jerusalem is especially holy to Jews as the location of the temple, their center of worship in ancient times. Christians consider Palestine the Holy Land and Jerusalem the Holy City because the major events in Jesus' life, death, and resurrection were concentrated there. And for Muslims, they regard Jerusalem as their third holiest city after Mecca and Medina, because it is the place from which Muhammad is thought by Muslims to have ascended to heaven. Islam became the region's most widely practiced religion beginning in the 7th century. The region of Israel and Palestine is home to one of the most contentious religious conflicts in the world today. In the aftermath of World War I, European colonialism came to a region that had previously been controlled and fought over by Jews, Romans, Christians, Muslims, and Ottomans. A newly formed League of Nations, which was a precursor to the United Nations, recognized British control of the land, calling the territorial mandate Palestine. At that point, the vast majority of people living in the land were Muslim Palestinians. The goal of the British government was to meet Zionist goals and to create in Palestine a national homeland for the Jewish people who had already begun to migrate to the area. The British explicitly assured the world that the religious and civil rights of existing non-Jewish peoples in Palestine would be protected. The British policy did not produce a peaceful result, however. Civil disturbances erupted almost immediately, and by 1947 through 1948, Jews and Palestinians engaged in open warfare. In the wake of World War II and the Holocaust, many more Jews moved to the region, and shortly after the war, the British mandate ended, and the newly formed United Nations voted to partition Palestine, creating independent Israeli and Palestinian states. As you can see in the first map, the partitioning plan was set for failure. Palestinians and Israelis were to live in non-contiguous states. Surrounding Arab states reacted violently against the new Jewish state. Israel survived through numerous wars in which Palestinians lost their land, farms, and villages. As a consequence of war and the consolidation of the Israeli state, Palestinians migrated or fled to refugee camps in neighboring Arab states. In the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, Israel gained control of the Palestinian lands in Gaza, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. Some Palestinians are willing to recognize the state of Israel with its Jewish majority in exchange for return of all territory taken by Israel in the 1967 Six-Day War. Other Palestinians don't recognize the right of Israel to exist and want to continue fighting for control of the entire territory between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. The United States, European countries, and Israel consider the Palestinian organization Hamas to be a terrorist organization. So, Israeli Jews have been divided between those who wish to retain some of the West Bank and those who wish to make compromises with the Palestinians in return for formal recognition and a stable peace. In recent years, a majority, that is a large majority of Israelis, have supported construction of a barrier to deter Palestinian attacks. So the situation in Israel and Palestine are quite difficult. The conflict over the small territory of the Holy Land is amplified by the sentiment of both Israelis and Palestinians that they have divine right to the land, by the violence inflicted on each other by both sides, and in the belief and emotional conviction by both parties that the territory belongs to them. Contributing to more intense religious conflict has been a resurgence of religious fundamentalism. As the name implies, fundamentalism is a literal interpretation and a strict and intense adherence to what the fundamentalists define as the basic principles of a religion or a religious branch, denomination, or sect. Fundamentalism started in the 19th century as a term for some fundamental principles held by some Protestants in the United States. And more recently, fundamentalism has instead been used to refer to groups who mix politics with aspects of their religion and make claims that their views are the only correct views. These groups sometimes advocate and practice violence to enforce their claims. For example, the Taliban, which means religious students, gained control of Afghanistan's government in 1996 and imposed very strict laws inspired by Islamic values as the Taliban interpreted them. For example, the Taliban banned playing music, watching TV, and surfing the internet. Men were beaten for shaving their beards, and women were stoned for committing adultery. Gay men were buried alive, and prostitutes were hanged in front of audiences. A NATO coalition overthrew the Taliban in 2001 and replaced it with a democratically elected government. However, the Taliban regained control of Afghanistan in 2021 and reimposed discriminatory practices against women and LGBTQ people. As a result of the fighting, more than 4 million people have become refugees or internally displaced persons in Afghanistan. In addition to the Taliban, the Islamic State is one of the most active terrorist organizations. The Islamic State originated in 1999 and became an affiliate of Al-Qaeda in 2004. The two organizations split apart in 2014. Members of the Islamic State are Sunni Muslims who seek to impose strict religious laws throughout Southwest Asia. They have maintained control of territory through human rights violations, such as beheading, massacres, and torture. Over the years, the Islamic State has controlled considerable territory in northern Iraq and eastern Syria, but its activities have declined since 2019 when the United States killed its leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. It's also important to note that the vast majority of the world's Muslims do not consider organizations such as the Taliban and ISIS or ISIL to reflect the true teachings of Islam.